made the decision that we're going out there. There's multiple machine guns, probably not going to be pretty. Most of us are probably going to die. It's just what it is. But we got to at least drag this dude around the corner and not let the Taliban get him.
This man you just heard is Sergeant Major Charles Ritter, the protagonist of an unknown but brutal battle in the Afghan War. On May 30th, 2013, Chuck, as his colleagues call him, was ambushed along with the 8 commandos under his command, in a situation of disadvantage not only in numbers, but also geographically. Today, in military force, we will see invaluable material from the soldiers' helmet cameras and testimonies from the protagonists of this story. We will tell you all about how one man, his perseverance, and 8 soldiers were able to fight against 300 Taliban trained to kill. We will talk about how Ritter and his leadership saved his troops, and how his daring action earned him severe injuries but one of the highest decorations in the Army. Without further ado, let's begin with today's video. The war on terrorism was a long process that consisted of more than one war, with thousands of battles and operations in different parts of the world, especially in the Middle East and some African countries. This is why the thousands of heroes who participated in it, defending the West from terrorists, often remain anonymous. Such is the case of Sergeant Chuck Ritter, who starred in his heroic action during the war in Afghanistan within the framework of Operation Enduring Freedom. Chuck Ritter, after having been part of the selection process for soldiers for various special forces, was sent to combat in Afghanistan in 2012, along with several of the troops that he himself had helped to form. There, he was part of the 6th Special Operations Kandak. A Kandak is a basic unit of the Afghan Army, which we would usually know simply as a battalion.
2012, I got cleared for duty, and then we went to Afghanistan, working with the 6th Special Operations Kandak. The Special Operations Kandak is a battalion size that went between 600 and 900 people. The Kandaks were kind of based off a Ranger Regiment model that could go out and strike at very specific targets. Or if the Taliban was getting very strong in a location, you could send these Special Operations Kandaks in. Some of them were just truly wanting to fight for their country, but most of them were just trying to survive.
Barely a year into combat duty, Chuck Ritter's division was faced with the bloodiest battle they had ever faced. It was May 30th, 2013, and they were in the Tagab Valley, a place very close to Kabul, the country's capital.
So we deployed in 2013, and it came down from higher. They said we were going to do a company-level mission in this place called Tagab Valley. Tagab Valley, oddly enough, is very close to the capital. It's a major route for the enemy to go up north into the rest of the country. They wanted to come in and use our 2 detachments and 6 Special Operations Kandak specifically to go in and clear this valley out so that the Americans could come in with some other Army forces and establish some control in the area, because it was just out of hand.
There would be 3 Army Corps moving in parallel on the mission to eliminate the Taliban. The main assault force, the secondary assault force, which was in charge of Ritter, and finally the C2 section, the high command and control section that directed the mission without being so brutally exposed to the fire of battle. The official report indicated to the sergeant the presence of between 300 and 800 enemies in the place that his forces had to clear, but his advanced combat experience told him that many times these numbers were usually inflated. Both he and the rest of the command assumed that this could have been one of those occasions, so they relaxed as much as possible. In any case, they prepared with the importance due to the mission, whose objective was to take control of the area to prevent the path from being used by the Taliban to go up to the north and take the rest of the country. Ritter and his men embarked on the mission, counting only with a small team of men.
As a Special Forces soldier, for me, I'd have maybe one other American that wasn't a Green Beret and 12 to 24 Afghans. We come in and we land with 3 CH-47 Chinooks. We land, we get off, and right when the helicopters took off, they started taking fire from the mountains from machine guns right away. And immediately, the stuff around the HLZ is not what I'm expecting. There's buildings there that weren't on the imagery that we were using. And we started moving, and we're in these poppy fields.
Sooner rather than later, Sergeant Ritter found that the situation was not what they had expected. His militia, which numbered no more than 30 people in total, was caught in enemy fire that came from the mountains onto the low ground where they were, putting them at a clear disadvantage. In addition, the presence of buildings whose existence they were unaware of not only made their own advance much more difficult, but also provided the ideal hiding place for the enemy. As best they could, among the poppy fields where they were, they defended themselves from the shelter of some ruins. The assault force received intense and precise enemy fire from machine guns, small arms, RPGs, and hand grenades that lasted for hours, slowing their advance. It would take them 2 long and exhausting hours more than planned to reach their first objective. But when they finally arrived at their destination, things would take an unexpected turn. No one had been in this part of the territory before, and their eyes could not believe what they were seeing. The soldiers arrived at a place that Ritter himself defined as labyrinthine, full of buildings, ruins, and clay walls that were not defensible. As best they could, they took up their battle positions and decided to wait there for a few hours, resting. The enemy's already known modus operandi indicated that they would not attack until after dawn. But then, the surprise came.
We had about 30 minutes before the sun came up. I was like, all right, man, I'm going down for a quick 30-minute nap. I was down for about 10 minutes. The next thing I know, there's 3 people on top of me. What the hell is going on?
They're in the courtyard.
I got woke up. Grenades were going off. One grenade landed in the courtyard. It didn't go off. If it would have gone off, it would have probably wounded most of us. I was like, okay, this is crazy. First of all, they're attacking us before the sun is fully up, so that's not normal. Generally, the firefight should start about an hour after sunrise, after prayer. Second of all, they're right on top of us. If they're throwing grenades over the walls, how are they getting so close to us? But the reality was this place was so mazed up that they could just get on top of us, and there's not a whole lot we can do.
Enemy fire was right on top of them, but so was another of the mission's assault forces, C2, which carried the high-ranking officers and the mission's captain. Sergeant Ritter contacted him. It turned out that while some collateral fire was reaching them, the attack was not direct. It was clear that the terrorists were trying to clear the soldiers from the ground below first. In order to preserve this unit, Ritter made the decision to go with a reduced team of 8 commandos and move out of the area. The objective was to have the enemies follow them to give the rest of the soldiers room to maneuver so they could, once and for all, clear the area. By then, the soldiers had realized that the enemy number was indeed the one that had been reported in the original report. 300 Taliban against 8 of their own. It was crazy.
We're seeing guys moving around. We're hitting those guys with hellfires. And then we move back. Those guys were just there to fight, which I hadn't seen since Iraq in 2005. They meant business. They basically allowed us to move past a large number of their force so they could come up and envelop us from both sides.
Caught in a sandwich of fire, the outlook looked bleak for Ritter and his troop. These men were determined to wipe them out, and there didn't seem to be many options. But Sergeant Ritter would rather die than give up, and he definitely didn't want to die. So he decided to use the Taliban's gambit against them.
We got some information that there was a large enemy force to the south maneuvering. I was like, okay, let me push out. I'll get around the backside of these guys, and as they move up towards our buildings, we'll ambush them.
The ambush had begun. After advancing 25 meters down a narrow alley, Sergeant Ritter's patrol was attacked by surprise with accurate machine gun fire. The initial burst of fire wounded one commando and drove the rest of the force into a covered position, leaving the wounded commando isolated in the attack zone.
2296.
Someone got shot.
55515. We have one commando wounded.
And that guy dropped.
Hey, let's go. We're going back. Go get him.
Most of the Afghans ran away. I was right behind the wall from this guy, and it was just a heavy amount of gunfire. I can see the guy's wounded. Do this crack. I'm like, okay, let's get the Afghans back, and let's get these Apaches firing on the outskirts of this open area.
The commando had been left behind one of the ruined doors of the urban labyrinth in which they were fighting. The terrorists were still above them and were not following Ritter and the rest of the soldiers who were just a few meters away without being attacked. Sergeant Ritter immediately communicated the situation to his superiors in order to receive air fire on the enemy position and allow his patrol to move and recover the wounded man. An attack with Apaches would be the most effective, killing all the insurgents in the area before continuing the fight. But the Apache that was supposed to save them was unable to do so. Incredible and unusual, the helicopter's weapons were faulty.
The Apaches, they were doing runs, but they weren't firing. Turns out Apache 1, his gun was bent, which means it's broken. Apache 2, nope, same thing. Didn't fire.
Alpha, this is Delta. Where's that fire?
Finally, we got enough Afghans back, made a decision that we have to get this guy. We're going out there. There's multiple machine guns. It's probably not going to be pretty. You know, most of us are probably going to die. It's just what it is. But we got to at least drag this dude around the corner and not let the Taliban get him.
The enemy began to maneuver through some orchards west of the battalion, eventually engaging the main force. At this point, Sergeant Ritter made a conscious decision, without regard for his own safety, to move forward to retrieve the wounded man, as the position in which the enemy fire had left them no longer allowed him to see the commando and look out for his well-being. Sergeant Ritter organized the commandos into a rescue force and began moving toward the wounded soldier while establishing a base of fire to cover their movement. Ritter knew it wasn't going to be easy. He knew some would die. But his military mettle was strong, and in his own words, he knew that in war, everything is what it is. He wasn't going to leave the wounded commando. He was going to retrieve him no matter what the cost. Even if what they retrieved was a dead body, American honor dictated that they bring that soldier home. They couldn't leave him on the battlefield, especially since it was already known that the Taliban carried out the most grotesque desecrations on enemy bodies. In addition, the location to which the Taliban had taken them was not at all comfortable. The threshold of the door was not a safe place. It is a rule of combat that every soldier has in mind when fighting. You must not stop at thresholds. So there were only two options: advance killing everything that stood in the way, or die trying. Hoping with faith that the result would be the first, they advanced.
We came around the corner. The Afghan platoon leader, me, and a couple other guys, was immediately a pretty massive 25-meter gunfight. There was two guys that were bounding, like textbook bounding, as you would see in military doctrine, about 15 meters away. Ended up shooting those two guys. There was a machine gun in each apex of this open area, eliminating the one machine gun. And then when you watch the helmet cam video, you can hear some grenades going off. I think I went through 3 mags out there. At this point, we're just out in the open too. There's no cover, so it was terrifying, right?
Once they began to move, the Taliban forces returned with a high volume of accurate fire, but it was suppressed by Sergeant Ritter's rescue element. After enduring an intense firefight, Ritter and his men managed to clear all the nearby terrain of enemies. The sergeant was delighted. Finally, with the path clear, they went to where the wounded soldier was. He was one of the Afghan counter-terrorism commandos. His wound was intense. Some of his fingers had been blown off, and he had a bullet in his knee that had gone through his leg, but his life was not in danger. The soldier would later tell Ritter that until he was rescued, he hallucinated that he was dead. They grabbed the wounded man and dragged him away. But as they began to move, from the same area where they thought they had annihilated all the enemies, a frightening news arrived. Rising from where supposedly there was nothing left but dust and stone, they saw new enemy fire flash. Stunned, they had to act quickly. How could there still be Taliban alive? It was not a question they could answer at that moment. The most important thing in the midst of helplessness and despair was to stay alive. Chuck, as always, took the initiative. Ritter tried to eliminate this new insurgent, but his audacity and bravery would cost him dearly.
So I transitioned over to where I'm pretty sure this PKM gunner is. I can't see him. I start unloading on where I think he's at. But I'm off. I think I was shooting too far to the left. He transitions to me, strikes me on the right leg. I was on a knee. And knocked that knee back like a sledgehammer. So I move forward. My whole body's like in a Superman position. The next round comes in and hits my upper back right here on the shoulder blade. Goes to the brachial nerve complex and the brachial artery and lodges in my lower back. And then a third round nicked my butt.
Of his 3 wounds, the most serious was the one in his back. Ritter had to crawl back about 40 meters to cover himself and receive treatment from the detachment doctor, while the rest of the rescue force split into 2. Some returned to pick up the original wounded man and carried him to a safe place. The others defended the terrain from the enemy fire that continued to fall on them.
Not too bad, Chuck. Not too bad. Does it come out the front?
I don't think so.
How's your breathing? Can you walk?
The most important thing for the commando now was to get out of there alive. Dragging 2 wounded men seemed impossible, and even more impossible was it that either of them would walk out of there on their own. But Sergeant Ritter seemed to have a particular knack for miracles. His heroism didn't allow him to be a burden to his colleagues and subordinates. After being injected with 5 milligrams of morphine, the wounded man stood up and walked with his colleagues until they reached their contact building safely, still leading the commandos despite his serious injuries. After being treated for his wounds again, Chuck Ritter was placed on a stretcher while the rest of the team, now reunited with the special forces they had left behind, cleaned up the area so they could get out of there.
It was like a scene out of the movie. I'm laying there in this taco, and you just hear this massive gunfight, and somebody'd come down and they're like, "Hey man, how you doing? Need some water? Give me some water." And they'd reconsolidate ammo there. They were starting to run low on ammo. And they're like, "All right, man, good luck, Chuck." And they go back into their fighting position. I'm like, shit, like what is going on? It sucked just being helpless. You're just basically laying there staring at the ceiling, watching everybody else do all this work. And it's just a really bad feeling.
As much as his spirit was devastated by not being able to fight, his comrades were controlling the situation for him. Everyone agreed that if Sergeant Ritter had not organized, inspired, and led the rescue force, the commando would have been taken prisoner or eliminated by the enemy. Now it was his turn to be brought home alive by the others. At last, they managed to clear enough of the area to move again.
And they got me to this building, and then they cleared enough area with AC-130, and managed to get the helicopters in there and get me out.
But this wasn't the end for Sergeant Major Chuck Ritter. His wanderings hadn't taken him so far as to give up his life's purpose for a single battle. As he was taken to the hospital for several surgeries, doctors warned him it would be years before he could fight again, before he could even use his arm normally again. But the doctors didn't know Sergeant Chuck Ritter.
It took me years to get used to my arm back and relearn how to do anything with it. So from the last surgery to redeployment was less than 3 months. I was told that it was going to be impossible to recover that fast. Second of all, they weren't going to let me go back because, it was my second time in combat where I was seriously wounded. So I was relearning how to use my arm. I was able to recover and function properly and redeploy to combat when everybody said it was impossible.
On March 27, 2014, Chuck Ritter was awarded the Silver Star by Lieutenant General Charles Cleveland, commander of U.S. Army Special Operations, for his bravery and heroic actions in combat. Even though they had lost the battle, thanks to him, deaths and catastrophes in combat were prevented. Ritter leaves us with a beautiful reflection on this life experience, which he will share throughout his career with his colleagues, subordinates, and anyone who will listen.
What drives us to do stuff like that? Are we trying to prove something to ourselves? If you truly believe that you're an unstoppable force of nature in life, then you will be, right? I just want to prove that to people.
That's it for today's video on military force. Do you want to meet other unstoppable war machines like Chuck Ritter? If you like this type of content, in which we analyze in depth the most important battles in military history, we invite you to subscribe and activate notifications to find out about all our deliveries. Thank you very much for joining us in today's video. See you next time.